Look, when you've been in the NFL for 9 years, you think you've seen everything. You think you know how this business works. But then you wake up one morning and realize you just walked away from $200,000 just to get out of Cleveland. That's exactly what happened to Damontae Kazee, and honestly, this story tells you everything you need to know about where the Browns are right now as an organization. So Kazee signs with Cleveland over the summer, right? He's coming off his time with the Steelers. He's a proven veteran, 9 years in the league. This is a guy who led the entire NFL in interceptions during his second season. We're talking about someone who knows how to play at this level. Over 360 career tackles, drafted by the Cardinals back in 2017, played at San Diego State. This isn't some practice squad player trying to hang on by his fingernails. This is a legitimate NFL safety who's had a solid career. But here's where it gets wild. He gets to Cleveland and suddenly he can't get on the field. 4 games, 48 total snaps, not 48 snaps per game. 48 snaps total across 4 games. For perspective, that's about 12 snaps per game. In a sport where your starters are playing 60-70 snaps a game, this dude is barely getting onto the field, and we're not talking about some rookie who needs development. This is a 32-year-old veteran who's been playing in this league since 2017. Now think about what that means for a player like Kazee. You're watching film all week, you're going through practice, you're doing everything that's asked of you as a professional, and then Sunday comes and you're standing on the sideline watching guys play your position. Maybe you get in for special teams. Maybe you get a handful of defensive snaps if someone needs a breather, but you're essentially invisible. You might as well not even be there. So what does he do? He goes to the Browns organization over the weekend and says, look, this isn't working, let me out. And here's the kicker, he agrees to forfeit over $200,000 in guaranteed money just to get released. Let that sink in for a second. This man is so desperate to get away from Cleveland that he's willing to leave $200,000 on the table. That's generational wealth for most people. That's a house. That's your kid's college fund. And he just walked away from it. According to Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network, this was a mutual agreement between Kazee and the team. The Browns didn't just cut him, he actively negotiated his way out. He essentially paid $200,000 for his freedom. Think about how bad the situation must have been for him to make that decision. This is a guy who had never been released in his 9-year career. Never. He's been traded, he's been a free agent, but never just straight up cut or released until now. And what did he accomplish during his time in Cleveland? Absolutely nothing on the stat sheet. 0 defensive stats. Not a single tackle. Not a single pass defended. Nothing. For a player who built his reputation on making plays, on getting interceptions, on being a difference maker in the secondary, that had to be soul crushing. You don't go from leading the league in picks to recording literally 0 defensive statistics unless something is seriously wrong. The Browns are sitting at 2-6 right now, 4th place in the AFC North, and they're just a complete disaster. This is a team that had playoff aspirations coming into the season. They've got Deshaun Watson on a fully guaranteed contract that looks worse by the week. Their defense, which was supposed to be elite, can't stop anybody. And somehow they've got a 9-year veteran safety who they're paying guaranteed money to, and they can't even find a way to get him on the field. What does that tell you about their coaching staff? What does that tell you about their personnel decisions? You sign a guy in the summer, presumably because you think he can help your team, and then you don't play him. And it's not like the Browns' secondary has been locked down. They've been giving up yards left and right. But still, Kazee couldn't crack the rotation. That's either a massive evaluation failure by whoever signed him, or it's a coaching staff that's too stubborn to adjust their game plan. The fan reaction to this has been pretty telling too. People on social media are both laughing at the situation and respecting Kazee's decision. One fan wrote that he essentially said, keep the 200,000, I just need snaps. That's a different kind of hunger. And he's right. How many players would actually do that? How many guys would walk away from guaranteed money just for the opportunity to play somewhere else? Most players would take the money and ride out the season on the bench. But not Kazee. He's willing to bet on himself. He's saying, I don't need your money. I need to be on a field playing football. Other fans are already speculating about where he might land next. The Lions keep coming up because they need depth in the secondary, and they've had some injuries back there. Detroit's having a great season. They're actually winning games. And for a veteran like Kazee, who's never been to a Super Bowl, that's gotta be appealing. You go from a 2-6 team that's going nowhere to a legitimate contender. Yeah, that makes sense, even if you're making less money. The Steelers connection is interesting too. Kazee played there last year. He knows the system. He knows the coaches. Pittsburgh's defense is always solid, and they could use veteran depth. Multiple fans pointed out that with all the safety injuries the Steelers have had, bringing back a familiar face could make sense for both sides. He'd be walking into a situation where he actually knows the playbook, knows the expectations, and could contribute immediately. But let's zoom out for a second and talk about what this really means. In the modern NFL, you almost never see players forfeit guaranteed money to leave a team. That's just not how it works. Teams cut players all the time and don't pay them, but players giving money back? That's extremely rare. It usually only happens when there's been some kind of serious off-field issue or legal problem, and even then it's usually the team fighting to void guarantees, not the player volunteering to give it up. So the fact that Kazee was willing to do this should be a massive red flag for the Browns organization. This is a player publicly saying, I would rather lose $200,000 than spend another week in your building. That's not just about playing time. That's about respect. That's about feeling valued. That's about believing in what your team is trying to do. And clearly, Kazee didn't believe in any of that in Cleveland. This is also a huge statement about the business side of football. Everyone always talks about how it's not personal, it's just business. Teams cut players all the time to save money, or because they found someone better. But this flips that script. This is a player cutting the team. This is a player saying, you know what, your organization is so dysfunctional that it's not worth it to me to stay here even for guaranteed money. That almost never happens. And think about what Kazee is gambling on here. He's 32 years old. That's not ancient in NFL years, especially for a safety, but it's not young either. He's in the back half of his career, maybe the back third. Every snap matters at this point. Every game check matters. But he clearly did the math and decided that his best chance at prolonging his career is to get out of Cleveland as fast as possible and find a team that will actually play him. Because here's the reality, if he stays in Cleveland for the rest of the season, barely playing, putting up 0 stats, what does his resume look like next offseason? It looks like a guy who couldn't get on the field for a bad team. That's a death sentence for a veteran trying to get another contract. But if he leaves now, signs with a contender, contributes down the stretch and maybe into the playoffs, suddenly his value goes way up. He's betting that the opportunity cost of staying in Cleveland is way higher than $200,000. The Browns have been an absolute mess for most of their existence. But this era was supposed to be different. They were supposed to have turned the corner. They went out and got Watson. They've drafted well on defense. They've got good pieces, but somehow they're still finding ways to be dysfunctional. And this Kazee situation is just another example of how things aren't working in that building. What's the locker room like when a veteran decides he'd rather forfeit 6 figures than keep showing up? What message does that send to the younger players? If a 9-year vet is willing to walk away from that kind of money, what does that say about the culture? It can't be good. You've got to assume that other players are watching this situation and taking notes. And from Kazee's perspective, this was probably a long time coming. He didn't just wake up one morning and decide to forfeit $200,000. This was likely building for weeks, not getting activated for games, or getting activated but barely playing, seeing guys who you know you're better than getting your snaps, feeling like the coaching staff doesn't believe in you or doesn't want to use you properly. That wears on you mentally. At some point, you decide that your mental health and your career are worth more than the guaranteed money. The other thing to consider is what this says about Kazee's confidence in himself. He genuinely believes that another team is going to sign him and give him a real opportunity. He's not worried that he's going to be out of the league. He's not panicking about where his next check is coming from. He knows that there are teams out there with injuries in the secondary, teams that need veteran depth, teams that would actually value what he brings to the table. So he's taking the calculated risk that leaving Cleveland now and getting to one of those situations is worth more than riding the bench for $200,000. It's also worth noting that this is only Kazee's first time being released. For 9 years, he's managed to stay employed in one of the most cutthroat leagues in professional sports. That's not easy. Most NFL careers last less than 3 years. The fact that he's made it 9 years means he's been doing something right. So for him to get released now, in what should be the prime veteran phase of his career, that's gotta sting, but maybe it's also motivating. Maybe this is the kick in the pants he needed to find the right situation. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a player is getting out of a bad situation. We've seen it countless times. A guy looks washed on one team, then goes somewhere else and suddenly looks like himself again. Maybe that'll be the case with Kazee. The timing of this is interesting too. We're past the midpoint of the season now. Teams are starting to figure out if they're contenders or pretenders. The Browns are clearly in the pretender category, but for teams that are making a push, adding a veteran safety with playoff experience could be huge. Kazee's played in big games. He knows what it takes. And for a team like Detroit or Pittsburgh or whoever might be interested, bringing in a guy like that for the stretch run could be valuable. From Cleveland's perspective, this has to be embarrassing. You spent money on a player in the offseason, presumably because your coaches and front office thought he could help, and then you couldn't even get him on the field. And now he's so unhappy that he's literally paying you to let him leave. That's not a good look. That's gonna make other free agents think twice about signing there. Why would you go to Cleveland if there's a chance you'll barely play and then have to forfeit money just to escape? The Browns have got to figure out what they're doing at this point. They're clearly not competing this year. Watson looks like a disaster. The defense isn't living up to expectations. And now you've got veterans actively trying to get out of the building. At some point, you have to blow it up and start over. You can't keep pretending like this is all going to work out. For Kazee, the next few weeks are going to be crucial. He needs to find the right landing spot, get signed, learn the system, and start contributing. If he can do that, this whole Cleveland situation becomes a footnote in his career. But if he struggles to find a team or doesn't perform well when he gets another opportunity, then walking away from that $200,000 starts to look like a mistake. My guess is he's going to land somewhere and be just fine. Teams always need safety depth, especially this time of year when injuries start piling up. And the fact that he was willing to forfeit guaranteed money shows teams that he's serious about playing, that he's not just collecting checks. That's the kind of attitude that coaches and front offices love to see. This whole situation is just another reminder of how brutal the NFL can be. 1 minute you're signing a deal thinking you're going to contribute to a team, and the next minute you're negotiating your way out and leaving money on the table just to get a fresh start. It happens fast. Your career can turn on a dime. But it also shows that players do have some agency in this league, even if it's limited. Kazee didn't just accept his fate of riding the bench in Cleveland. He took control of his situation, made a tough financial decision, and is betting on himself to find something better. That takes guts. Most guys wouldn't do it, but Kazee clearly values playing time and opportunity over guaranteed money, at least in this situation. The Browns are going to keep losing, keep being dysfunctional, and keep making decisions that don't make sense. That's who they are at this point, but Kazee gets to move on and hopefully find a situation where he can actually play football and contribute to a winning team. And honestly, even if it costs him $200,000, that's probably worth it for his sanity and his career.